Okay, so Theosophy. Ancient wisdom, secret societies. It's even got its fingers in abstract art and Indian independence, believe it or not.
Definitely makes you wonder what else is out there.
Right. And it all starts with this woman, Helena Blavatsky, who claims she could channel wisdom from, get this, Tibetan masters.
Oh, wild, Rob.
Wild doesn't even begin to cover it. But before we get to Blavatsky and her Himalayan hotline, what is Theosophy? I mean, how would you explain it to someone who thinks esoteric just means overpriced?
Well, imagine a system of thought, right, that tries to connect all these different spiritual traditions, East, West, ancient myths, you name it. Theosophy is trying to find the common thread, the hidden wisdom that ties it all together.
So like a spiritual melting pot, but with a secret recipe.
Exactly, and that's where the esoteric bit comes in. Theosophists believe there's this deeper level of reality, this hidden truth most people don't even know exists. They see themselves as uncovering these secrets, peeling back the layers to reveal the true nature of the universe.
Okay, so it's not just lighting incense and hoping for the best. There's an actual system of knowledge here, a whole cosmology they're trying to understand.
Precisely. And that brings us back to Helena Blavatsky. She's the one who pulls all these different pieces together in the late 19th century and turns it into a movement.
And this is where things get interesting. Blavatsky, she wasn't exactly known for being subtle, was she?
Not at all. Picture this. It's the late 1800s. America's going through this period of spiritual searching. Industrialization, new science challenging old beliefs, people fascinated by Eastern religions. So into this scene walks Blavatsky, this incredibly charismatic, completely eccentric woman claiming to be in contact with these mysterious spiritual masters living in the Himalayas.
Talking about good timing.
Yeah.
Right when people are looking for something more, something beyond traditional religion.
Exactly. And she offers them this whole system of thought, this idea that there's more to life than meets the eye, these hidden truths waiting to be discovered.
And these hidden truths were revealed to her by the masters, right? These enlightened beings hanging out in the Himalayas. And these masters, they supposedly had some pretty incredible powers, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Blavatsky said they were practically superhuman. Astral travel, telepathy, manipulating matter with their minds. The ultimate spiritual mentors, guiding humanity from behind the scenes.
Okay, but who were these masters, really? Actual people or more like thought archetypes or something?
That's the million-dollar question. Blavatsky insisted they were real living people who'd reached the peak of spiritual evolution. She even gave names. Kuthumi, Moria. These were supposedly her main teachers, but were they historical figures? Or more like symbols of spiritual attainment? It's still up for debate.
Either way, it's a brilliant narrative device. Who wouldn't want wisdom from a council of Himalayan mystics?
Right. It definitely adds to the mystique.
And she laid all this out in her books.
Yeah.
Right? Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine.
Exactly. Those books are like the Theosophical Gospels. Dense, complex, trying to bring together everything from ancient Eastern scriptures to Western occultism. And Blavatsky claimed they were basically dictated to her by the masters, that she was just the messenger.
Wow. So not just Blavatsky riffing on esoteric ideas she picked up traveling. This was presented as the real deal, straight from the ascended masters.
That's how she framed it. And people were captivated. There was this real hunger for this kind of spiritual knowledge, something that went beyond conventional religion, something that offered a bigger picture.
So she taps into this cultural moment, positions herself as this link between humanity and these mystical masters. Boom! Theosophy is born.
And it spreads like wildfire.
But what did Theosophists actually believe? What were the core ideas that drew people to this movement?
Well, to get that, we need to look at some of their more, let's just say, unique concepts, starting with the idea of root races.
Ah, yes. The root races. That's where Theosophy takes a hard left into. Well, let's just say things get a little out there. But we'll save that for after a quick break. Stay with us. Okay, root races. Lay it on me. Blavatsky throws out our usual ideas about history, about evolution, and replaces it with what, exactly?
Well, get ready, because Theosophical history, it's a wild ride. Imagine humanity going through these different evolutionary stages. Each one is a root race, and we're not just talking about like gradual changes. These were civilizations with powers and technology that blow our minds today.
Okay, less cavemen figuring out fire, more ancient astronauts and telekinesis. I'm listening, but you got to give me the details. What were these root races actually like?
So, Blavatsky describes 7 root races in total, each one with its own unique qualities and like a purpose in the grand scheme of evolution. Some were more spiritually advanced, others more focused on the material world. take the very first root race. She puts them millions of years ago, and they were these ethereal beings, almost like living shadows, existing on a lost continent in the Arctic.
The Arctic. Okay, already we're going way off the beaten path of history here.
Oh, absolutely, and it gets wilder. The second root race, they supposedly lived on a continent called Hyperborea, somewhere in the North Atlantic. Still pretty ethereal, but starting to become more physical, more connected to the material world. And this is where things get really interesting. The third root race, the Lemurians. Now, they were something else.
Lemuria, right. The mythical continent in the Pacific. I did some reading. Advanced technology, psychic powers, giants.
And we can't forget the massive floods that eventually wipe them out, which then leads to the next root race, the Atlanteans. And of course, Atlantis. Everybody's heard of Atlantis, right? Lost civilizations, hidden knowledge, the whole 9 yards. Blavatsky describes them as this incredibly powerful race, both technologically and psychically, but ultimately they were undone by their own arrogance.
Classic rise and fall, but with a theosophical twist. Each root race reaches these heights of spiritual and material achievement, and then boom, something happens, a flood, some cataclysm, maybe just their own decline, and they're gone, making way for the next cycle to begin.
Exactly. And according to Blavatsky, us, humanity as we know it, we're the fifth root race, the Aryan root race. She believed we were getting close to the peak of our cycle, but that a sixth root race was already emerging, one that would bring about a new age of spiritual enlightenment.
Hold on. Are we talking about actual historical civilizations here, or more like symbolic representations of human evolution?
That's the question that's been debated for years, both by theosophists and scholars. Blavatsky herself seemed to blur those lines between literal history and allegorical myth. But the important thing isn't whether these root races literally existed, but what they represent within Theosophy.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. These root races aren't just about where humanity lived millions of years ago. They're about our spiritual direction, this constant cycle of growth, decline, and starting over.
You got it. And this idea of cyclical history, of humanity's spiritual evolution unfolding over these vast periods, that's really key to understanding Theosophy. And it ties directly into their beliefs about reincarnation and karma.
All right, we've got these root races, each one a stage in our development. But what's driving that development? Is it random? Or is there some purpose to it, some direction?
That's where reincarnation and karma come in. Absolutely central to what Theosophists believe. They believe that the soul, this inner self, is reborn again and again, experiencing life in different bodies, different historical periods even.
So each lifetime is like a chapter in the soul's journey.
Precisely. And karma. Karma is the force that moves that journey forward. It's like a cosmic law of cause and effect. Every action, thought, intention creates a ripple that affects future experiences.
So the choices we make now, they don't just have consequences in this life, but in future lives as well.
That's the idea. It's about taking responsibility for your actions, understanding that we're creating our own destinies in this life and the ones to come.
Okay, so we've got root races, reincarnation, karma. It's a lot to take in, but it's starting to come together, like this big cosmic tapestry, all these threads woven together. History, spirituality, evolution, even personal responsibility.
That's it. You're getting it. And this is what makes Theosophy so interesting, the way it takes all these seemingly separate elements and tries to create this one coherent worldview.
And this worldview, it actually had a pretty big impact, didn't it? I mean, we mentioned its influence on art and politics earlier. It's one thing to have these big cosmic ideas, but how did Theosophy actually make its way into the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's not always a simple answer. But let's start with someone like Wassily Kandinsky, Russian painter, considered one of the pioneers of abstract art. He was deeply into Theosophy, especially its ideas about the spiritual power of color.
Okay, now this is where those unexpected connections get really fascinating. Kandinsky and Theosophy. How did those two worlds collide?
Well, remember how we were talking about Theosophists believing in this hidden inner truth to existence? Kandinsky thought art could be a way to access that truth, and that color was the key.
So instead of painting like realistic things, he was trying to capture something more abstract, something more spiritual.
Exactly. He believed that certain colors could evoke specific emotions, even spiritual experiences. Like, he associated yellow with warmth and joy, blue with spirituality and peace, and black with death and the void.
I can definitely see how those ideas would resonate with Theosophy's focus on reaching those higher states of consciousness.
Absolutely. And Kandinsky wasn't just talking about this. He put those ideas right into his paintings. He moved away from traditional representational art and created these vibrant, abstract compositions that were meant to evoke spiritual experiences in the viewer. He even called his paintings compositions or improvisations, suggesting a more intuitive, spiritual approach to creating art.
Wow. So his paintings were almost like visual representations of theosophical principles. Instead of showing the physical world, he was trying to capture that invisible spiritual reality that Theosophy pointed toward.
Precisely. And that's just one example of how theosophical ideas influenced art. You see similar things in the work of other artists who were drawn to Theosophy, like Piet Mondrian and Hilma of Klint.
It makes you think, what other unexpected connections are we missing? We've got art, but what about those other areas you mentioned, like science and politics?
Right, well, let's shift gears for a second and talk about Mahatma Gandhi. Now, Gandhi wasn't a card-carrying theosophist, but his encounters with theosophical ideas, particularly during his time in London, had a big impact on how his philosophy of nonviolent resistance developed.
Okay, now that's a curveball. Gandhi and Theosophy. I need some background here. How did those two worlds even come into contact?
Well, in the late 19th century, London was like a theosophical hub. Blavatsky had passed away, but her successors, Annie Besant and William Quan Judge, were busy spreading the word. Gandhi, who was a young law student at the time, was drawn to their message of universal brotherhood and spiritual self-realization.
That tracks with what we know about Gandhi, his emphasis on unity and spiritual principles.
Exactly. He was particularly drawn to the theosophical concept of universal brotherhood. This idea that at our core, we're all interconnected, all part of the same spiritual fabric.
And that idea really resonated with his own developing philosophy of nonviolence.
Precisely. Gandhi saw Theosophy as offering a kind of spiritual basis for his own ideas about social justice and equality. He was also interested in Theosophy's focus on personal transformation as a way to bring about social change.
So even though he didn't necessarily embrace every single theosophical doctrine, he found ideas and principles within it that spoke to him, that helped him shape his own approach to activism.
Exactly. And that's what I find so fascinating about tracing the influence of Theosophy. It's not always about these direct one-to-one connections. Sometimes it's about these more subtle influences, these shared ideas that take root in different areas.
Like planting a seed. You might not always see the fruit it bears, but it's there, subtly shaping things.
And speaking of shaping things, Theosophy itself wasn't immune to change and internal disagreements. Remember those successors to Blavatsky we mentioned? Well, let's just say they didn't always see eye to eye on where Theosophy should go next, which brings us to the fascinating Back to Blavatsky movement.
All right, so we left off with this Back to Blavatsky movement. Sounds like Theosophy had its fair share of internal squabbles, even with those enlightened masters supposedly running the show.
Well, I guess even movements founded on ancient wisdom and spiritual unity, they're not immune to a little human disagreement. Remember how Blavatsky's successors, Besant and Judge, they had these different ideas about how Theosophy should evolve.
Yeah, like that family dinner where everyone argues about the right way to make Grandma's famous recipe.
Exactly. And in this case, the recipe was Theosophy. Some members felt Besant and Judge were drifting too far from what Blavatsky originally taught. Getting too caught up in personalities and rituals, not enough focus on the core principles.
So they wanted to get Theosophy back on track, back to its roots.
Exactly. A return to Blavatsky's original writings. Her focus on universal brotherhood, on self-transformation through study and practice. They saw it as a way to cut through what they saw as unnecessary extras, get back to the heart of Theosophy.
It's interesting how even a movement all about unity and spiritual evolution couldn't escape these kinds of internal divisions. Shows you, I guess, wherever you have people, you're going to have different interpretations, different approaches. And yes, another little drama.
It definitely adds another layer to the story. But what strikes me about this Back to Blavatsky thing is what it says about her influence, how long it lasted. Even decades after she died, people were still wrestling with her ideas, still finding them relevant.
It's like she tapped into something that still resonates with people, even today, even if they've never heard of Theosophy or Blavatsky.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Reincarnation, karma, the idea that there's this whole hidden spiritual dimension. These weren't exactly mainstream ideas back then. They were kind of out there on the fringes. And now they're everywhere.
It's true. Meditation apps, people talk about past lives, bookstores full of spirituality books. It's like Theosophy Light is mainstream now.
Exactly. Makes you wonder what ideas that seem out there now. What's going to be commonplace in the future? What will be the next Theosophy, the next movement that sparks ideas that take root in unexpected ways and shape things for years to come?
It's a good question to leave people with, I think. And a good place to wrap up our deep dive into Theosophy. We've gone from ancient wisdom to secret societies, from abstract art to Indian independence, all thanks to a woman who dared to imagine a different kind of reality.
A woman who, whether you agree with her or not, definitely made an impact, made people think.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions.